All right, so now we're going to um, conclude our lectures on Reconstruction. I noticed in the last lecture I made a mistake when I discussed the election of 1868 and 1872. At one point I accidentally said 1862. I don't know if you caught that, but just make a note of that. It's not a real big deal. I'm not going to test you on dates, but you just need to know that these elections were in 1868 and 1872 between Grant and Seymour, and then Grant and Greeley. I mean, again, I'm not going to test you like, when was this election or whatever. I just want to make sure uh, that I corrected myself on that. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Amnesty Act of 1872, and then again, we're going to move into the end of Reconstruction. So the Amnesty Act of 1872, what was it? Well, it re-enfranchised. They started chipping away a little bit at the Military Reconstruction Acts. And the Amnesty Act of 1872 re-enfranchised or politically re-enfranchised white Southerners. And this meant that now white Southerners that had been involved with the Confederacy in the Civil War, fighting against the Union, that were politically disenfranchised, now they could vote. For a while, they could not. And, when they couldn't, it was interesting because in the South, you basically had three groups of people that took over state and local governments. You had African Americans, the vast majority of whom had been former slaves. You had Northerners that came down to the South to kind of take advantage of this situation, and they were called carpetbaggers. They were called carpetbaggers because the carpetbag was like a term they used for suitcases, and so they were not from the South, and they came down to, as I said, take advantage of the situation. And also, white Southerners that had remained loyal to the Union could uh, participate in Southern state and local governments, and they were called scalawags. Anyway, because of the Amnesty Act of 1872, this is something that you need to know. White Southerners were politically re-enfranchised. Now, in the Panic of 1873, this was a depression that hit, and they used to call them panics because people would run to the bank in order to get their money out before the banks closed. This was a run on banks, and this is significant because it kind of drew attention away from the concern that some people had of the political rights of former slaves in the South. And you'll see what I mean a little bit later if I get a chance of kind of to go into detail about the Compromise of 1877. Now, the election of 1876 is what brought about the Compromise of 1877, which ended Reconstruction. Now, the two candidates were Rutherford B. Hayes, he was the Republican, and Samuel J. Tilden, who was the Democrat. And Tilden won the popular vote, but there was a dispute in the Electoral College. Now, remember, you can't just win the popular vote. Al Gore won the popular vote, but yet George W. Bush won the election because it was decided that George W. Bush won a majority of the electoral vote. Okay? And this happens every now and then in American history, and some people talk about changing it. And I don't know, maybe that's something that you can look into and eventually have an opinion about if you don't already. Well, the three states where there was a dispute about the electoral votes, all right, or results, was Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida. In Louisiana, Republicans thought Rutherford B. Hayes won. Democrats thought Samuel J. Tilden won. Same thing in South Carolina and Florida. They needed 185 votes to win, and Tilden had 184. Hayes had 165. The three remaining states had together 20 votes. So Congress passed the Electoral Count Act. 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, 1 independent, Justice David Davis. Davis resigned, though, and the commission was made up of 7 Democrats and 8 Republicans, and they voted, and Hayes won. All right, they voted in order to, they said, okay, the returns that say that Hayes won in those 3 states were the legitimate um, votes. And that's why they often called Hayes owed 8-7. Or sometimes they would call him Rutherfraud instead of Rutherford. He only had 1 term. Wasn't very effective. So exactly let me go back a second. What was the Compromise of 1877? This was not so much the compromise. The compromise was really that the Southern representatives and Southern senators and the Southern states would accept Hayes as the winner. But one of the things that they had to do, among others, and your book goes into a little more detail, I believe. Um, but one of the main things is they had to withdraw. They had to withdraw troops from the South. Remember, part of the Military Reconstruction Acts. I mentioned that, and maybe it was the second lecture. I'm not sure. When I talked about the Military Reconstruction Acts, part of it was that they were going to the North was going to um, occupy the South with the military, and there were some other things, um, but it was basically, ended. All right, the Compromise of 1877 ended Reconstruction. Now, was Reconstruction, successful? Well, one of the things that Reconstruction did, and it really depends on one's view. Um, to Southerners, of course, they felt that it was terrible. I mean, it was like a military despotism. To Northerners, they thought, well, overall, I mean, we only took the right to vote away from white Southerners for 5 years after they, basically took up arms against the federal government. Which today, if you do that, I mean, go to the White House or go to Capitol Hill in Washington and, you know, take out a gun, and see what happens to you. I mean, that's, people look at that as treason today. And so people looked at the Southern secession as treason. Southerners, of course, looked at it like, well, they had every right to secede. I mean, state, in the Constitutional Convention, delegates at the Constitutional Convention would have never signed ratified the Constitution if they didn't feel like they had every right to secede. So it's really interesting. It really depends on your view. Now, in terms of African Americans in the South, what you will see is that Reconstruction really was not successful. It seemed like it was successful for a while, but we will see later on that Southern states started taking the right to vote away from African Americans to the point to where by 1920 in Louisiana there was only there really wasn't that many registered black voters at all. I have the exact number somewhere. When we talk about that later on in the semester, I'll give you the exact number. But it wasn't many at all. And so, for the most part, African Americans in the South didn't have the right to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. So anyway, I hope this helps you some. Make sure on the test that you do know what the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were. I didn't put that on the study guide, but you do need to know that. And that is something that's often viewed as kind of a success of Reconstruction, that those amendments were passed. All right, later.